Good evening, everyone. Hello. I want to welcome you all to the Holland Land Office Museum for our guest speaker series. This is a program we do now 2 to 3 times a month, which is with the help of Tompkins Community Bank and the Rotary Club of Batavia to help put this on. So we're very excited to have our presenter tonight, Jules Hoepting from Letchworth State Park. Everybody's talking about the Erie Canal right now, but we're going to talk about a different canal tonight. So, Genesee Valley Canal. So Jules will talk to us about another waterway of Western New York. Jules?
Thank you for having me. How is the microphone sound? Can you hear me okay? Does it need to be louder? We're all good? Yeah, so my name is Jules Hoepting, and I work on in the education department of the New York State Parks Genesee region. So my office is in the Nature Center in Letchworth State Park, which means I have the privilege of driving by beautiful canyons every day on the way into work. Such a burden, right? And we have multiple parks within the region, including Darien Lakes would be the closest one, Hamlin Beach, Lakeside, Letchworth, and Genesee Valley Greenway State Park, which, spoiler, is what the Genesee Valley Canal has evolved into. So if you're interested, I have some cards that you can email if you would like to get a PDF version of all of our programs. Most of these are guided walks, but we do a winter lecture series in the winter as well, or if you just want to get in contact with me or anyone else from the education department, you can use this. And I also brought some maps of Genesee Valley Greenway State Park in case you would like to pick up a copy and check it out for yourself.
You don't realize it until you see it there.
It's a pretty big park, yeah. It spans over 5 counties actually. So the title of this presentation is Short Stories Along the Genesee Valley Canal. I've done different presentations more about the infrastructure of the canal itself, which is super fascinating. It was a very dramatic, crazy canal, but I was looking for different ways for its story to appeal to people. So I also wanted to focus on more stories of people along the canal, along the way. So, why me? How did I even get into this at all? How is this my job? So I grew up along the Erie Canal, which is currently celebrating its 200th birthday, in case you didn't already know. And I always liked it just because it was water and I'm a water baby, and my mom and I would go for walks on it or pass over it every day on the way to school. And that's kind of the extent that I thought about the Erie Canal. And then the year 2020 happened, and we all did something that we didn't really think we were going to do. So some people made a lot of bread, some people got really into crafting. I just started walking along the Erie Canalway Trail, and I started off, what if I walked from like Albion to Holly and back in a day? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I can actually do that. What if I went from Holly to the next town over? All right, so now I've done this 50-mile section of the Erie Canalway Trail. What if I kept going? So my weird pandemic story is that I walked across the state on the Erie Canalway Trail, which is a weird thing to do. Yeah. And technically twice, because I do everything as there and backs, and I did skip the sections that were on road to be completely transparent. But I read all of the historic signs along the way about the Erie Canal, and after I did that, I could never look at it the same way again, and I became very much in love with that waterway. And then I learned about the Genesee Valley Canal via Genesee Valley Greenway State Park. And I was like, well, obviously I have to do all that too. And I was walking around in Ohio and Cuyahoga Valley National Park, and I heard about the Ohio and Erie Canal, and I was like, well, obviously I have to walk all of that too. So I have walked over 1,000 miles on canal trails, which is a weird thing to do, but that is where a lot of my understanding is coming from. from is from literally walking next to the remaining infrastructure and reading a lot of the signs along the way. So needless to say, I am pretty passionate about this topic. This might be a longer lecture. I have like 180 slides. Yeah, some of them will go a little quicker than you think. But I'll try to be pretty high energy, so I think it'll be okay. So, overview of what I'm going to be talking about tonight, a prologue of the canal craze, what started this whole thing, followed by the Genesee Valley Canal, the construction of it. It was a very dramatic waterway, and then we got our 5 people-related stories. Battle of the Ditch, throwing money in a cave, temptations of Jockey Street, moving monuments, and these walls have seen murder. So starting off with the canal craze. So mid-1800s, this is what the canal system looked like in New York State. And of course, it all started from the Erie Canal, that main branch, the horizontal one that all the other ones are branching off of vertically. So the thing about the Erie Canal is that it is like a coming of age film to me. Like it's quite the quintessential American story. All right, so you know, roads weren't super great in New York State or in America in the early 1800s. You had like very muddy pathways with like stones and exposed roots, and it's not super easy to move things around. So there was, you know, this movement of what if we made a canal, and also that could help us move west. Problem was, there wasn't exactly any canal engineers, there wasn't like a school for civil engineering, so people pretty much made up the route as they went along, and it was not really professionals who did it, which makes it super inspiring. In fact, the person who is credited with coming up with the route of the Erie Canal did it from prison. That's a little misleading. It was debtor's prison. It was a flour merchant by the name of Jesse Holly. And he's like, you know what, I can't make any money selling my flour in the Rochester area because there's not a good way to transport it. So then when he went into debtor's prison, he was looking at a map of New York State and he's like, you know, if I was to put a canal here, where would I put it? And I think the route is fairly obvious. You would put it in the flattest part of the state. This is a point that will come back later, the flattest part of the state. So from going to Buffalo to Albany and then hooking into the Hudson River down to New York City. And initially, a lot of people think this is a crazy idea. Thomas Jefferson, who's the president, says it is a little short of madness to pursue the Erie Canal. So it is not federally funded, it is funded by New York State, by Governor DeWitt Clinton, is the one who is best remembered for really pushing for it, and they're calling it Clinton's Ditch and Clinton's Folly, and people just don't think it's going to be a good idea. But it ends up being an overnight sensation, metaphorically. They started digging it on July 4th and finished in 1825. Again, July 4th, 1817 to 1825, so 200 years ago, yeah.
Wow, was Clinton Street named after him?
Clinton Street in Batavia, I don't have the answer
Never
to
know.
that. But someone here probably does, so hold on to that question, and you can find out. So DeWitt Clinton, and they're actually recreating this ceremony this year, rode a boat called the Seneca Chief, where he started in Buffalo and was going to ride down to Albany and eventually New York City via the canal and the river. And the story that I read on so many signs as I was going along the Erie Canal is about the winning of the waters, which is where Clinton scoops up a bucket of water in Lake Erie, keeps it on a Seneca Chief boat, and then dumps it into the Atlantic Ocean. And then vice versa, scoops it up in the Atlantic Ocean, comes back and puts it in Lake Erie, so the winning of the waters. And they're recreating that this year. And although that is a really cool story, when I learned about something else that happened during the Erie Canal, I wondered why the heck I did not see it on more signs. So in addition to that, they had lined cannons along the entire route of the Erie Canal within earshot of each other. So as soon as DeWitt Clinton left Buffalo, as soon as the person behind the cannon could hear it, the next person would set it off, and the next person, and the next person. So within about 90 minutes, it is communicated that Clinton has left Buffalo to New York City within 90 minutes. So this is 1825. This is before there's a telegraph. This is before there's other major forms of like technologically aided communication. So to me, I think that's pretty cool and should be on more historic signs. But that's just me.
That should be.
So needless to say, the Erie Canal has so much to do with the development of New York State. If you actually look at the comparison between its route and a population map of New York State, you'll notice it lines up perfectly. It established all of our major cities like Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Schenectady, Albany, and New York City. New York City went from being like the 7th largest port to number 1. After Erie opened, cost of freight went down like 90%. Travel time was way down as well. So obviously, the rest of New York State is looking at this and they're like, can we have a canal too? That would be really nice. And so this is where the flux of all these canals were made across New York State, which are called lateral canals or branch canals. And of course, I'm going to be focusing on the Genesee Valley Canal today. And it expanded beyond New York State. This is a map of canals in like Northeast America. Blue is river, red is abandoned canals, and orange is canals active to this day. So within like 30 years, 3,000 miles of canals were pretty much handled. That is crazy. That is a movement. That is a canal craze. Yeah. And then if you look at the canal system of New York today, this is what you will see. There are a lot of the branch canals, including the Genesee Valley Canal, have been abandoned. The Erie Canal was expanded multiple times throughout its life to accommodate larger and larger traffic. And then it kind of went through, it had 2 major hits in the 1950s. One of them was the St. Lawrence Seaway, which was an even larger canal that could accommodate even bigger boats. And the other one was the interstate system, thruway system, which if you look at I-90, kind of parallels the route of the Erie Canal. So then the Erie Canal went through a phase that everything does, where for a while it's just like outdated. And then you give it enough time, and suddenly it's historic and vintage.
Just like Route 66.
Like everything, right? Everything goes through that period. So in the 80s and 90s, this movement keeps up to kind of rebrand the Erie Canal and its trail as like an outdoor recreation or like a historic corridor. So now there's the Erie Canalway Trail. And that movement to repurpose these historic corridors as outdoor recreation is the same movement that the Genesee Valley Greenway State Park is riding off of, which is why I bring it up, to kind of put it all together. So now, finally, from here on out, talking about the Genesee Valley Canal. So this is a close-up of it and how it's connected to the Erie Canal. The grand idea was to connect the Erie Canal in Rochester down to the Allegheny River in Olean, which would eventually go into the Ohio River and the Mississippi River. So being able to connect these waterways to each other was the grand plan. The southern section was more used for lumber. That was a lot of virgin woods at the time. The northern section was a lot more grain and agricultural products, which if you drive around that area of the Genesee Valley today, you will see is still a lot of agriculture. And then part of when they were petitioning to do this in the early, like 1920s, 1930s, is they also got an extension from Mount Morris to Dansville, a part of the canal as well. So, you know, why is the Erie Canal still here? And why is the Genesee Valley Canal not here? Like, why was one a little more successful than the other? 2 major factors: timing and topography. So the Genesee Valley Canal started to be made just as railroads were, here's a pun, starting to pick up steam. Yeah, all I have is dead jokes. And by the time it was finished, railroads had risen a lot in popularity. So it's kind of against its own technological advantages. That wasn't a sentence, but I think you know what I was trying to say. And then the other thing is topography. Like I mentioned,
Yeah.
They put the Erie Canal in the flattest part of New York State. They put the Genesee Valley Canal
Or direct.
up a hill. More specifically, it was actually the highest canal ever made in terms of feet above elevation. It rose over 900 feet within like 106 miles. Wow. So if you've ever been to Letchworth State Park and you look at Archery Field Overlook, which is the tallest part that we have in the park, that rock formation on the other side is about 550 feet tall. So if you can kind of picture that, that on top of itself twice is how much this canal had to rise in less than 100 miles, and most of that in less than 80 miles. It's a crazy one. So general dimensions of it, it would have been about 40 feet long and 4 feet deep, and then it would have a tow path on the side, which would be used for mules towing barges along them. Which makes sense when you look at its belt tow path like that. When I was a small child walking the Erie Canal Trail, I thought it was called a tow path because you have toes on your feet and it was a footpath. Nope. That's not what I meant. And so this is part of the reason why the remains of the Genesee Valley Canal do look pretty small, is that it was 40 feet long, and if you're looking at Erie, you're looking at a much bigger version of Erie. This would have been in line with what Erie originally was. So this is a side profile of the Genesee Valley Canal. Over here is Rochester, the Great Lakes Plains, and then this really part where it's like hiking up, it's actually going over 500 feet up in 15 miles. That's going around Letchworth State Park. And then it has to go another hundreds of miles near the Allegheny Appalachian Mountains near Olean. And if you see all these little like notches as it's going up from its side profile, those all kind of look like stairs, and those are actually locks. So a lock, big term picture, is like a stair. When you're in it, it acts more like an elevator, like a water elevator. So if you can imagine that an elevator doors are opening, you step into it, and the elevator doors close, and a rope is taking you to a floor above or below, and the rope is what's moving you. Same idea, but in the lock, the water displacement is what is raising the boat or lowering it. And this is a canal in Ohio that is pretty on par with what the Genesee Valley Canal would have looked like. So I like to use that as a reference for what it probably actually looked like back in the day, all those lines. Unfortunately, a lot of them, pretty much all of them are not looking as good. There were over 100 locks made for this canal, and there are about 15 that you can see along the Genesee Valley Greenway State Park today. Some of them got repurposed for other things. Some of them might be like people's backyards that might not be state property and they don't necessarily know what it is, lots of different reasons. Or the blocks might have just been repurposed for different projects over the years.
We saw a bunch of them years ago.
Yeah, here's a few. And then how big were they, since people are often curious about this. This is a photo of one taken in 1970, so like 50 years ago. And it still looks like an abandoned lock, which is kind of the fun thing about this canal too. So 15 feet wide, 90 feet long. And the boats, look at a boat up here, would have been about 14 feet wide and 70 feet long. And this is a picture on par of the dimensions for that kind of boat in a parking lot to give you a better visual of how big it would be.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm a very visual learner, if you haven't picked up on that by now. And I also think it's funny that a lot of them are just like in the middle of a town and there's a car wash station behind it and a storage unit, and it's just like, looks like a lot there. Yeah, it's in that day. So the reason I even got into locks is because A, the canal had a ton of them, and B, as you can imagine, you're gonna need a lot of water to operate over 100 locks. So where is it pulling its water from? The Genesee Valley Canal pulls a lot of its water from the Genesee River. That does make sense. So here's a photo of the park today. So on the very left is the remains of the canal prism, and then the Genesee Valley Greenway, so looks like the walkable path, and the Genesee River to the right. For a lot of it, it is made very close to the Genesee River. The thing about the Genesee River, though, she fluctuates a lot. So this is the Genesee River going through Letchworth State Park in Upper Falls. You notice on the left, this is like a heavy rain in February, and this is August. So these are within the same year. You can see how much that's fluctuating. So sometimes there's so much water that it's actually destroying the canal that they've already started to make. And other times, there's so little water that boats are just stuck in it. And as you can imagine, people are really happy about being stuck in their boat for a week. And that does relate to a story later on. So just kind of a quick overview of the development of this canal because it took a long time. So in 1836, which is 11 years after the Erie Canal was completed, it got authorized. Within 3 years, it's already Mount Morris. 2 years later, the Dansville side cut is complete. And overall, this is the most successful section of the Genesee Valley Canal. Again, it's also kind of the flattest section of the Genesee Valley Canal. You could get between Dansville and Rochester in a day. I don't know the timestamp for traveling the rest of the canal. I haven't read that anywhere. And then a character appears that's going to keep haunting us tonight, called the Stop and Tax Law. So for this 5-year period, in 1842 to 48, when political power shifted over, New York State was like, we are spending way too much money on canals. How about we just spend money on maintaining the ones we have, and any ones that are under construction, we just let it sit there for 5 years. And that means that most of this route had been laid out, and it sat there for 5 years, exposed to the weather, exposed to people who might want to steal that fine-looking block in their backyard. That's a part of the law. People are people. And then it resumes. But by 1850, there's already a railroad in Olean, which is its final destination. 6 years after that, the canal gets to Olean, but it's still not yet at the Allegheny River, which takes another 6 years. Yes. So this project was supposed to take like 5 years to make, and it took 26. So that type of project was started in 1999 and was supposed to be done in 2004 and got done this year. It's a pretty long time. That's a good chunk of a life. So somebody asked me earlier today, how long was the canal open for? And this is why I said it gets a little complicated, or a little, you can do the mean answer or the nice answer. You will usually see it written as 1840 to when it was later abandoned 16 years later in 1878. Or you can do the mean answer, which is when the full thing was open, which is 1862 to 1878. So the whole thing was only open for 16 years. Pretty dramatic. And New York State was realizing that a lot of its canals weren't performing as well as it wanted to, so it shut down a lot of the lateral canals in 1878. It wasn't just this one. 2 years later, the Genesee Valley Canal Railroad is authorized. So people were realizing, hey, this is already a route that people are used to having a form of transportation go through. You know, we might as well just put a railroad on top of it since the canal isn't working, or even towns that can support it. So we'll just do that. Yes, it was called the Genesee Valley Canal Railroad. And initially I was like, why on earth would you name it that? That is so confusing. And then I read, it's because there were so many railroads. There was already one called the Genesee Valley Railroad. Usually you will see this referred to as the Rochester branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad, which is how I will refer to it throughout the rest of the presentation. So within 2 years, that railroad is complete. You will notice it does not include the section from Mount Morris to Dansville, and it does not include a section from the town of Hinsdale down to Olean. And that is why they are no longer a part of the park today, is that the park is following the route of the railroad, which is slightly different from the route of the canal. So, this is the part where I like to turn this into an auction, okay? So they spent almost $7 million trying to make this canal and to maintain it over the years, which is the second most expensive canal behind Erie, which was redone so many times. How much do you think they sold it to the railroad for? guesses? 7 million. Way less than 7 million. You said $1?
100,000.
More than, less than 100,000, more than $1.
Why? 12.
$12. Add a few more zeros, it was less than $13,000.
Wow.
I know! I told you, it's a dramatic character.
Whoa.
So this is probably a little hard to see, but I'm out of Genesee Valley Greenway State Park today. So the Rochester branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad was abandoned in the 1960s in different sections. And then a few years later, Rochester Gas and Electric, which most people just call RG&E, purchased portions of the corridor, which is why today in the Greenway there's still electricity lines on a lot of it. And then Parks, New York State Parks, and Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC, purchased remaining portions of the corridor in the 80s. And then with that movement to repurpose historic routes into like outdoor recreation units, came along in the 90s, and we had the first 2 miles of the trail completed in 1992. The following year, Friends of the Genesee Valley Greenway was formed. And then in 2011, it officially became a state park. Yeah. So it's a linear park, it crosses 5 counties, and it's very much a work in progress. It has a 90-mile corridor, about 70 miles of it is trails. And some of it has stone dust surfacing, a lot of it is grassy. It's very much a work in progress, but we're getting there, and one of the ways to get there is for me to talk about it and get people really excited about it. Yeah?
You may have said this, what year, when was it the idea was hatched to turn this into the Greenway, to, for it to be a trail source?
Into a, when was the
A
idea
state park, a
actually
trail.
make it to a state park? I think probably like since the 90s. I don't know about a state park necessarily,
Yeah.
but 90s and 80s I think it's been going on. It takes a while, and then also at this point too, it's a trail that's like going through people's yards, and some people are all for having a trail going through those yards, and some people are not so okay with that. So when you're looking at the Greenway today, you are following the railroad bed of the Rochester branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad. And so for the most part, you can see it in this image pretty clearly. You are walking on the old railroad bed and you can see the canal prism. And sometimes the canal prism's on the left, and sometimes it's on the right, and sometimes it's completely out of sight, because railroads and canals bend in different angles, so it's not dead on the canal. So here's what our park looks like today in the northern end, where we have a nice stone dust surface. You can see that remaining canal prism actually filled with water, or kind of lower levels of water. This would be north of Letchworth. You can see the RG&E lines, and then the prism to the left of it, and this is the man-made pond to the right. And in the south, we have that grassy surface, and then to the left you can see, yeah, we got a little, yes, this is Belfast, New York. Remains of the canal. So, story number 1, Battle of the Ditch. So this is taking place in Dansville, New York, which again, that side cut from Mount Morris to Dansville was not included with the railroad, so there's not really a trail there. It was kind of hard to find it. But back in the day, this is an older map of Dansville in the 1800s. This is where they put the Genesee Valley Canal branch through Dansville. However, this is where the main street of the town is, and where all the business owners were. And so this guy named George Highland, who was a business owner, and a bunch of other people in the town, about 30 of them, were really not happy with the situation. And it also happened that some people who had a lot of say in Dansville politically, the Faulkners, their property was really close to the Genesee Valley Canal over there. So they thought it was a bit politically incentivized that it was on the other side of the town, very inconvenient for the rest of Dansville citizens. So they got together, George Highland and his 30 volunteers, they called themselves the Dansville Volunteers, and they thought, what if we raise money to buy a strip of land and extend it out to Main Street, which would go precisely here. So again, the canal reached Dansville in 1841, and then the following year, the stop and tax law comes into play, so the citizens can't exactly ask New York State to make this. So that's why they raise $6,000 and purchase this strip of land, and then get to digging a 40-foot wide prism in the middle of a town, which is not exactly something you can like get away with without people knowing about it, since it is a 40-foot prism in the middle of the town. And the Faulkners, the political savvy people, were pretty aware of this, and they made sure that New York State Canal employees were aware of it too. So it just so happened, as the Dansville volunteers were about to break ground between their ditch and the official Genesee Valley Canal, a few barges showed up with a bunch of New York State Canal employees on there. So that's them on their bank. This is my bad graphic of the Dansville ditch and the Genesee Valley Canal, and them trying to shovel their way through it. And so the New York State Canal people over here, this is the Dansville volunteers. And George Highland makes a comment, and it starts a fight. And they are fighting with pickaxes and shovels. And the fight does not last very long, because, well, the New York State Canal employees are just getting paid for the day. They're not really like that passionate about it. And the Dansville volunteers are really passionate about it. And, you know, they got some strength in numbers and all that, so the battle doesn't last too long. They win. They dig through the earth so that their ditch connects to the Genesee Valley Canal. And by the end of the next day, there is water in that side branch, and boats can go through. Now, an alternative version of the story, that's a bit more of an old wives' tale that we can't really prove, but it's funny, is that when they were having their fight, a bunch of women showed up carrying scythes. And the canal people went, "Oh my God, women with scythes, what are we gonna do? They're gonna fight us." But they were just trying to give it to their husbands to help them aid in the war, but, you know, women with weapons was way too scary. Probably not true, but I think it's a little funny. So New York State wants to press charges against George Highland and the Dansville volunteers for meddling with New York State property, meaning that bank of the Genesee Valley Canal. But then they realized that, because they charged when people went through the different locks, that they were getting way more traffic to Dansville on the side branch after they had dug this extension. And they were like, you know what? You kind of like doubled our income over there. Never mind. You're fine. You didn't do anything wrong. So I did walk around. There is a street called Battle Street in Dansville today, which is where that strip would have been. I did walk around it. I didn't really see any remains of the Genesee Valley Canal, but there is Battle Street Brewery in an old railroad depot, commemorating, like nodding to the fact that a battle had been there. Story number 2, throwing money into a cave. Yes, we got some excitement about this. It's one of my favorites.
When I went there,
Yeah.
they had gates on it.
Yeah.
And I could have walked in when I was younger. And then I started hearing something, I thought it was a rattlesnake, but it turns out it was the bat.
Yeah.
Boy, that was scary.
So this takes place in Letchworth State Park. This is a modern view of Middle Falls. But if we were to rewind to the 1850s, 1860s, this is what that spot would have looked like. Yeah. So we have a pedestrian bridge across the waterfall. There's a dam behind it. There's a lumber mill. You notice it looks pretty deforested. That railroad bridge in the back was made out of 200 to 300 acres of wood. Where do you think they got it? The surrounding area. And in addition to that, they put the Genesee Valley Canal on the side of the cliff on the other side of Middle Falls.
Yeah,
Yes. Craziness.
yeah.
I will never get over it. So if we were to stand on the wooden bridge and look down, this is what we would see.
Okay.
So this is the Genesee River. This is the Genesee Valley Canal. This is the tow path. There's like some ladies walking along the tow path. And then if we were to get at their level, this is what we would see.
Infrastructure.
Yeah, no, it is a phenomenal bridge. That wasn't there, super, super long. This is my favorite photo of the Genesee Valley Canal that I found. It's hard to find pictures of it in the first place. Most of them are in the Letchworth area just because it's been photographed so much, but just the clarity of this image, I felt like I could touch the water. And I got like chills this time I saw it.
That's, yeah,
It's a good one.
engineering.
Yes. So if you were to look at Inspiration Point today, well, this was taken like January 1st, but today, this is what you would see. And if you were to rewind back into the canal days, that's what you would see. Because they decided to put, like I said, the canal on the side of a canyon. Now, why on earth would you put a canal on the side of a canyon? Like next to hundreds of feet of straight drop off into water.
And it crumbles.
It does crumble. That doesn't seem like a great idea. Do they have like any alternative ideas about where to put this thing? Yes, that would be a tunnel. So their original idea was to bypass putting it on the side of a cliff by creating a tunnel. So you can see the edge of the canyon over there. This one sticks out.
But that tunnel didn't work. did it?
Well, this is where they ended up putting the canal. Very much on the side of the cliff. Pretty sketchy. So here's an old picture of the entrance to the tunnel. So tunnels were like the it factor in the canal world. Pennsylvania had one, Europe had one. The Genesee Valley Canal is already like the highest canal in the world. It might as well have a tunnel too and be the ultimate engineering phenomenon. And they test the rock initially and they're like, yeah, that seems pretty solid. I think we can go through with this. And they started the tunnel by going through the middle and then going in either direction. They didn't start from one side and go out, they went from the middle and out. And initially, they were scooping up rocks in their aprons and taking it to the side of the canyon, dumping it in.
Oh,
And then when they got a little more space to go into the tunnel, they started loading up the wheelbarrows and doing things like that. And then as they got further into the tunnel, they started to notice some problems. Turns out the rock wasn't so secure, and they would actually have to, this is kind of the diagram of what the tunnel would have looked like. You can see this would be the water, this would be the towpath from inside. And they realized they were gonna have to line the ceiling of it with a whole bunch of brick to keep it in place, which is gonna make it an even more expensive project. And then they get further on into the tunnel and they're like, oh, there's a bunch of quicksand. Maybe this isn't such a great idea. And then our dear friend, the stop and tax law happens. So for 5 years, this tunnel is just sitting there, falling in on itself. And then they resume work on it, and unfortunately there is another landslide, and 12 workers are killed. And they decide, you know what, they think about, you know, we need to think of something else to do. We can continue this tunnel. We have spent $200,000 on it. We can finish it for $100,000, but that's really expensive. We could blast the side of the canyon for $30,000. What do you think they did? So this is the process. You can't see the water in it because they're actively digging that canal on the side of the canyon. And when this was finished, yes, to answer your question, there were people who chose not to ride in this part of the canal because it is pretty scary to put something that close to edge. So this is it when it's all done. But the problems don't quite end with them putting it on the side of the canyon. There is more loose rock further on down, known as the slide area. So if you see this little wooden structure in the back, if we were to, here's the image of it from the side. So this is a modern day photo of Middle Falls from the side versus a historic one. And then there's a little bit of a wooden structure in the corner of that photo, and I'll zoom in on it for you. So that's where they put the canal. And this is not a very clear photo, but this is a graphic that I've seen of them describing how they put the canal on the side of the cliff, which does not look exactly like the most stable thing to do. But they put it there. So, looking at Letchworth today, this is the remains of the slide area. You can kind of see how there's some loose soil there, but the trees kind of fill it out for the most part. So I didn't initially get, like, why do they keep calling it the slide area? Why do they keep making such a big deal out of it? And then I found these photos from the late 1960s after they had recently taken the railroad out that, of course, followed the canal on the side of the cliff. And I was like, oh, that's why they call it the slide area.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of dirt that just fell into the river. But back to the tunnel, because the drama is not over with the tunnel. There's still quite more drama to do with the tunnel. The engineer that is working on this section of the canal, his name is Elijah Johnson. He was formerly a mayor of Rochester. And when he's working on the canal around what initially was the tunnel, he was like, you know what? I want to make myself a really nice house. I'm going to be here for a while. So he makes Hornby Lodge. Now this is a 2 to 3 story house, depending what account you read. It has 8 sides to it. You can imagine a square, and then like the joint of every square has another square coming off of it. That's what it would have looked like. Which is pretty cool by itself. Additionally, there was a tree in the middle of it, with like roots on the ground and leaves coming up through the ceiling. And there was a spiral staircase wrapping around the tree. And all the furniture was made out of knobby wood. And there was a lot of weird taxidermy. I don't know about you, but I would want to see Hornby Lodge. I think it'd be a pretty cool structure. So lots of canal commissioners went there. Thomas Cole, who is known for the Hudson River School art movement, went there and painted a photo of Hornby Lodge right on the tip. This would be Inspiration Point today. This is also prior to the canal being made and prior to the wooden bridge being made. So this is a rare photo of Letchworth before major deforestation. So pretty cool. Elijah's daughter gets married there, I guess in the winter, because they were stuck there for like 3 days because of a snowstorm. Lots of people like to visit it, and there was like a little balcony overlooking the side of the canyon. But overall, it wasn't there for very long. Actually, it was there for less than 10 years. So again, here's the route of the tunnel. Here's the route of the canal. That's where his house was. So when they were in the process of blasting the side of the canyon to make a canal, it got really close to his house and partially damaged it. And they're like, heck with it, we'll just take the whole thing down. But the problems with this area do not end just yet. Next, the canal has to cross the Genesee River just south of Letchworth State Park. So it continues on underneath that bridge, and it goes over an aqueduct. This is a restored one on one of the older versions of the Erie Canal to give you a visual of what it would have looked like back in the day. So instead of a bridge carrying cars and people over something, it's carrying water over water or a valley. It's an aqueduct. So here are the remains of the Genesee Valley Canal aqueduct. We are standing in the town of Genesee Falls, Portageville area, looking at the southern end of the park.
And that was an aqueduct there, okay, over the Genesee.
Yes, over the Genesee River. It was over 400 feet long and like 50 feet long. And then this is from up the banks, so you can see this is Letchworth over here, some of the abutments remaining. And a friend hanging out next to it to give you some scale perspective about how big it is.
Looks like it's the king of the mountain.
He is the king of the mountain. And this is the actual aqueduct. So again, we are on the Genesee Falls side looking at the southern end of Letchworth State Park. So that's the actual aqueduct. And one side has more rounded abutments to probably for erosion, and the other side has more flat. So if you were to jump on the other side of it, you would see remains. too. That's a pretty detailed image. And they're like always leaking. I haven't seen an old image of an aqueduct that wasn't leaking. But I wasn't around when that era. But back to the tunnel, because I said I'm not done with the tunnel. As you can imagine, after blasting the side of the cliff and continuing through the canal days, there still remains of an attempt to make a tunnel, so this would be quite a popular spot to go and check out along the local period people. I don't know why I keep saying period, for several decades. So this is Emily Madden, who is a huge canal bluff, and her husband photographed all the remaining infrastructure of the Genesee Valley Canal in the 1950s and 60s. And I will slowly be going through that over the next few months. So she's exploring the tunnel. This is what it would have looked like from the inside of the canal. During a winter day, with a bunch of stag lights in. And I read some accounts from some scientists over the years, how the different ways people were vandalizing it, like starting fires in it, and all the different ways they were trying to put gates on it, and the creative ways people destroyed them, and the accumulation of beer bottles, and how's that?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, people are people. So this is if you were standing in the tunnel looking out, this is the railroad in the spot where the canal was, which you can see is literally next to the side of a cliff, and you can still walk that today on trail number 7. And then this image can be a little hard to see. There's a guy right here, he does blend in. In the 1960s, they made an interesting discovery. They're like, not the most stable structure for people to just be going in and out of and having their bonfires. It's actually a really important habitat for bats. Most specifically, little brown bats, some big brown bats, tricolored bats. At one point, they found a bat that had been tagged in Florida, in Silver Springs, Florida, in that duggo. And this is what it looks like today. You are very much not getting in there. And then from the trail, this is what it would look like. So I like to joke, they spent over $200,000 on this tunnel, which is about over $1 million today, on what would become a bat cave.
It worked it.
Yeah.
I worked it.
Well worth it. So if you were to go to Inspiration Point in Letchworth and walk up to the star, this is a lot easier to do in November and the winter seasons when there's not leaves on the trees. You can actually see the bat cave if you know what you're looking for. So this shelf would have been the canal and the railroad. That's the bat cave, and that's pretty much what it's going to look like. And that's where the lodge would have been.
Should have loaded up.
Temptations of Jockey Street. This one is a roller coaster. You like roller coasters?
I love them.
Oh.
I put them on in the first time and said, yahoo!
Oh,
The Skyliner that used to be in Roseland Park
I'm not familiar.
in Daygua
And it's now into
decades ago.
Okay.
Altoona. But the thing is, he was there the first time,
Oh,
and I said, I'll put him in the middle.
yeah.
And then I said, you're on the back end.
Okay.
And we're going, all of a sudden, a cloud outburst, just boom.
Oh my.
And we're going, ah! That was fun.
This is not a little roller coaster, but
That's a
I
big
feel
one.
like one.
Big one.
So this is taking place in the hamlet of Houghton within the town of Canada. This is what the Greenway looks like in Canada today. Again, you can see the Genesee River over here and the RGD lines on the Greenway. So the central character in this is going to be a fellow by the name of Willard J. Houghton. So the hamlet of Houghton was not actually named after him. It was named after his great-grandfather, Luther Houghton, and he acquired it in the early 1800s. And on the other side of the river was the Canada Reservation from the Seneca Nation. So I will get a little more into that later on, but the Canada Reservation was there from like 1797 to 1820s before they ended up selling it, but a lot of the Seneca continued to live in that area and interact with the townspeople. So Luther Houghton and his kids would go over and hang out with the Seneca and vice versa. A lot of them continued to live in that area long after it was sold off and interact with the community. And then this phenomenon comes in the 1850s called the Genesee Valley Canal. And it really changes the landscape of this fairly peaceful hamlet with the introduction of alcohol. Yes.
Yeah, it always works.
Changes everything.
So there is a historic marker along Holland's Main Street today that says Jockey Street, because back in the day it was known as Jockey Street, and it says, once famous rendezvous for Genesee Valley Canal boatmen. So this is an aerial shot of Houghton, and you'll notice it has a pretty straight strip, and that is where the jockeys, the horse racing men, would race their horses and place bets on who's gonna win. So the starting location would be next to Jockey Street Tavern, and half a mile down the street at Dr. Tucker's house, and then they'd come back for a full mile of racing and gambling. And within this half a mile strip, there are over 14 accommodations that provide like a taverns and bars and hotels and places you can stay to really engage in all the activities. And over here would be the Genesee Valley Canal, which is right next to this. So there's like street fights actively going on. It's very much the culture to get out there and party and race the horses. So this is a modern image of the Erie Canal in its off season. So to this day, for over half the year, the Erie Canal is drained because when water freezes, ice forms, and that's not really the best for the infrastructure of the canal, so they drain it to work on its infrastructure. And that practice has been going on since the 1800s, which means for half the year, canal boatmen are not riding the waters on the canal. And if you're a canal boatman and you're looking for a good time, you're looking for a fun place to stay, you're gonna dock your boat in Holland, New York over the winter so you can continue to gamble on the horses and drink alcohol. And also, like I mentioned earlier, the Genesee Valley Canal had a lot of issues when it came to having enough water. There were definitely periods where it could have been low for like a month. So imagine, also the reason I showed this image is you can just see how mucky it is on the bottom, and trying to walk through that is way harder than you think it is. So this is not a description of Houghton, but it is a description of Cuba and New York, which was another town along the canal. And if Houghton, New York was the #1 party town in all of New York State, then it must be somehow worse than this description to give you some context of how bad it was. So this was written in 1914 by Captain H.P. Marsh. It says, boat crews many times would get into mischief while waiting during those obstructions caused by breaks in canal, lock, or low water. And although there were many good, honest, law-abiding boatmen, there would, in a crowd of boats, be rowdies among the crew who would take advantage of their idleness to get into mischief. They pretended to be fighting men and were generally feared by the citizens along the water highways. I remember when some boats were stalled in the village of Cuba waiting for water, the rough element of the boat's crew would get together, swagger around town, insult the citizens, and offer to fight everyone they came in contact with, climb stovepipes in hotels, and make nuisances of themselves, generally. One night, the rowdy canal men, through some pretext or other, got a number of the fast boys around town to come aboard one of their boats, which was anchored in the middle of the empty canal, and the rowdy canal men were hidden under the decks. When the town boys all got around, the boatmen pulled in the running plank and set to pounding and kicking the visitors, then threw them overboard, and some would have undoubtedly have been drowned had there been enough water for navigation. There was great rejoicing when there came sufficient water for the boats to sail away to their respective ports. Yeah, pretty rowdy. So Willard J. Houghton, who lives up on a hill, so Houghton is like kind of a valley, it's built on the side of a valley. He's looking at this, and he's like, this was once a pretty peaceful town, now you're expected to party. And he did go through a phase, admittedly, of being pretty into dancing. There was a description of a July 4th party where he and some other guys broke through the floor. But his brother in particular was very fond of drinking, and he saw how it was affecting his family, and he saw how it was affecting his town. And he was like, you know what, this is not right. This is not sitting well. I need to do something about it. So he turns to religion. So
See, that's where it is.
the Erie Canal and all of its branch and lateral canals were like the internet of its day. They were spreading a lot of ideas, a lot of the abolition movements, a lot of religious movements, a lot of like women's rights movements were spreading throughout New York State. So the religious movement is called the Second Great Awakening, and Western New York in particular is referred to as the burned over district because religion was spreading as fast as fire spreading through a forest. Now, some historians will look back on that and say that's not necessarily true. Like, it was happening in a lot of places. It wasn't necessarily just Western New York, but that's what it gets known as. So there was a new branch off of the Methodist Episcopal Church called the Wesleyan Methodist Church. And that's the one that Willard J. Hoepting was supporting. And how they differed is that the Wesleyan Methodist Church was supportive of abolition. They supported people of all races. And they were very much supportive of the temperance movement. And I was initially like, okay, how bad was the drinking that there was a whole movement trying to stop it? And then I did some quick searches into this. So in the 1790s, the average American was consuming about 6 gallons of pure alcohol. A few decades later, that would be 7 gallons of pure alcohol. And today is about 2 gallons of pure alcohol. And I was like, oh, okay. I understand why this movement took off.
Is that a day, a month, a year?
A year.
No,
A year. Oh my gosh, 2 gallons of pure alcohol a day. How are we alive?
2 gallons a year really isn't that much, if you think about it.
It's pure alcohol.
Well, pure, not like 40%.
Oh, you mean 100%?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
What is real things.
Yeah, so my understanding would have been more watered down back in the day, and they would drink alcohol because they knew that it was safer to drink. The water source wasn't always reliable. But it was still a shocking fact. Sorry?
I said, had dirty water, you have to drink the booze.
Well, you go in the water, you gotta drink booze. So initially, Willard J. Hoepting does a lot of Sunday school teachings in the general area, and then he raises enough funds in the 1870s to make a church. So where does he put the church? Here's the church. He puts it directly across the street from Jockey Street Tavern, where all the races start. And again, the canal's just on the other side of this. So when those canalers, which if you read old documents, refer to them as canalers for some reason, when those canalers are at the start of Jockey Street, they have to think, they have to make a decision. Racing and alcohol or God. But that is not enough for Willard J. Hoepting. He decides to give them the finger. He puts a statue of a finger on the top of the church, pointing to heaven, to really nail it in. You should be thinking about what's going to happen later. And I was lucky enough to go in the basement of Houghton University at his library, and I saw the finger in its actuality. So it's about this big. And then I got a gentleman to put it on a table and took a picture with a portrait of him in the background. So the railroad comes through after the canal is abandoned. So you can see a bit of the canal prism over here and the river off in the distance. And a lot of the rowdiness really dies down because they can't spend all winter here. Railroads run all year long, which is part of the reason why they outcompete the canals. And he ends up forming, this is another photo of Hoepting back in the day. You can see the remains of the Genesee Valley Canal over here. A Hoepting seminary. So the Wesleyan Methodist Church wanted to create these schools, and they wanted to put them out in the countryside because they wanted to get them away from the evils of the city. And so the Hoepting Seminary eventually evolves into Hoepting University, which is what the hamlet of Hoepting is now known as today. So it is a Christian liberal arts school, and Hoepting, which is in the town of Candia, is one of 6 strike towns in New York State. So it went from #1 capital of partying to,
Yeah,
that's, I told you, it was a roller coaster.
that's right.
It's still dry today.
It's still dry to this day, yeah.
Yeah, you can't find anything.
So the lovely town of Canada historian took me on a tour around Houghton, and she was so passionate about it, Laura Hoepting. And so this is on Main Street. This is this greenhouse. It had been moved since its days, but it was Jockey Street Tavern back in the day. And we moved on down to now an apartment that would have been a temperance tavern back in the day, which is a little hilarious because part of their temperance movement wasn't just alcohol, but in Houghton specifically, they were also anti-coffee. And right next to this is a coffee shop. And further down the road is a coffee roasting place. There they roast the beans called Jockey Street Coffee Roasters. Scandalous.
You can have coffee safe.
And then the turnaround point would be Dr. Tucker's house today. And she took me up the hill to see where his home would have been, and looking off in the other directions with some horses in their coats. This is what not what he would have seen, but the equestrian center today would have been his view looking down on Houghton. So, moving monuments, now that I've mentioned that there was a canal in Letchworth State Park, and now that I have mentioned there was the Canada Reservation, this thing kind of goes between the two of them, and I felt like I needed to include it as well.
Yeah.
So this takes place around a man known as William Howard Letchworth, who is most known for donating his Glen Iris estate to New York to become Letchworth State Park. When it comes to Mr. Letchworth, though, he is pretty hard to dislike. He got an honorary doctor's degree for his work with mental health. He did a lot of reform with poorhouses and how people with epilepsy were being treated. And he also was very passionate about preserving indigenous culture. So this is a map of the Seneca reservations in 1797, which is when the Big Tree Treaty happened. And then I added in green where Letchworth State Park is today. So Canada would be just south of Letchworth State Park. So the history between the colonists and the indigenous is not a pleasant one. It's in a very simplified version. A lot of, we promise you can have this land. Actually, we take that back. You can have a smaller piece of land over and over and over again. So before people moved over from Europe, there was the Haudenosaunee Confederacy that lived in this area. And the Seneca and the Mohawks were two of those groups that belonged in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The American Revolution happens in the later 1700s, and the Seneca side with the British, and the Mohawk side with the Americans. We obviously know who won the American Revolution. And so a few decades later, they make this treaty that breaks down into these different reservations. So by the time William Carr Letchworth is living on his property, which would later become the park, these have pretty much all been sold. But he does do a visit down to Houghton in Canada, and he notices this structure, this council house that is there and kind of falling apart. So the council house is where the Seneca would meet for speakers or have their official meetings. It wasn't a dwelling necessarily, and you'll notice it is made out of wood. It's not a longhouse because it was made after a period of being influenced by colonists. And he decides that he is going to purchase that building that is falling apart and restore it and keep it on his grounds so that people can go and visit it and he can preserve the history. And he has a guy named John Shanks who lived on the Canada Reservation who was familiar with it, disassemble this log by log and number it and float it down the Genesee Valley Canal for like over 20 miles and then put it on the other bank of the Genesee River in what is now Letchworth State Park, waited until the river and waited until the winter when the river was frozen up, scooted the logs across and reassembled it. Make the council house.
Yes.
But that wasn't enough. There was also the last council fire in 1872. So because the Mohawks and the Senecas had fought on different sides during the American Revolution, there had been a rift in them ever since. So for this 100-year period, there was a rift, and Mr. Letchworth decided to host the last council fire where representatives of the Mohawks and the Senecas could get together over a restored building to preserve indigenous culture. And also included in there are local historians and like the president, Miller Filmer, who Mr. Letchworth was friends with. And they all come down for this very emotional healing ceremony. So that's the council house today. You can go visit it on the council grounds, which has a few other structures up there as well. And then the brick over here is because there was a pioneer family that lived in it prior to William Pryor Letchworth purchasing it. So this is the inside of it. You can see the chimney. We're to flip on over. First and for comparison. And then you can actually see the numbering on some of the
Wow.
names.
Never looked at that. That's a little bit down.
All right. This one's a little more sensational. I've read a lot of different versions of it and kind of compiled the version that I liked the most to present to you today. So the last story of the night is these walls have seen murder. So this is taking place in Belfast, New York, as some of you have mentioned before. This is what the Canal Warehouse looks like today, where the murders did happen. There is a recent historic sign outside of it. There's been a lot of repairs to it over the past few years from the back. Definitely looks like an old structure that's been around and seen a lot, you could say. So the warehouse timeline, it was originally a warehouse for the canal owned by Mark Tytesworth, so sometimes you'll see it referred to as Tytesworth Warehouse. So this would have been like a grocery store and a place where the boats would have come in and like bought goods or sold goods type of thing. And then after the canal was abandoned, it was used as a storage barn or a terminal for coal for the railroad. And then from 1905 to 1910, it went through a very interesting period where it was owned by the DeCelios and became a brothel. And there were 4 murders that happened within 4 years. And then after the DeCelios left, it has multiple lives. It's been used as like a pig barn, storehouse in the past few years. Again, there's been a lot of efforts to preserve it as a historic building. So this is an old map of Belfast. You can see the towns over here. And off in the corner is the warehouse next to the canal. This is a satellite image to give you more of an idea of what it looks like right now. So Mike DeCelio and Antonetta, or Ma'am DeCelio, end up moving to Belfast in the early 1900s. They are Italian immigrants and they are there to work on the railroad. So Belfast actually has 3 railroads at this time. It has the Rochester branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad, which is now the Greenway. It has the ES Railroad, the Buffalo and Susquehanna, and it has the Erie Railroad, all going through it. So they need a lot of laborers to make these railroads and maintain them. So they formed DeCelio's brothel, targeting the Italian, yes, targeting the Italian immigrants in the area. Other people could come, but they weren't necessarily welcome. So this is the setup of what they would have going on. Here would be their brothel. So when they purchased the former canal warehouse, they made the first floor where they would serve the alcohol, and the second floor is where the ladies of the night would have been. And in every description I have read of this, it says that they plastered the whole thing with gaudy wallpaper. It's always described as gaudy wallpaper. So across, this would be the former canal. Here's the railroad. This would be a bakery that they also owned. Next to that is a hotel. And across the hotel would be a depot.
Oh, what?
A train depot. So they needed some employees for their brothel. They had, I'm horrible at pronouncing things, so I'm probably going to mess these up. Giuseppe Sanducci, who is a baker and a bartender, and a description described him as a strange man who pretty much only talked to the DeCelios and carried a gun around at all times. And then Pearl Poole was one of the many ladies of the night, but the one that got mentioned the most and had a fun name. So 2 customers arrived in 1907 one day, Joseph Dardano and Albert Mantica. And they go up to the bakery, and there's the awkward Giuseppe, and they're like, hey, and we have some food. And Giuseppe's like, no. So then they go over to the warehouse, or the brothel, and they're like, hey, go have some liquor. And he's like, no. And they're like, okay. By the way, we're not actually customers who happen to speak Italian and English. We're actually detectives coming from New York State, and you are under, Mike DeCilio has been indicted because, well, why do you think? Is it because of the activities happening on the second floor why they would indict Mike DeCilio? Yeah, taxes. He didn't pay the taxes on his liquor. So they head up to Albany, go through with this, and then come back to Belfast to host a trial to get Mike DeCilio. And he ends up getting away scot-free. His buddy just bails him out. And then Joseph and Albert head over to the depot across the street, and they wait for a train to arrive. They're just ready to head out of town. And then this weird-looking dude starts walking towards them, who is carrying a gun in his hand, and he murders them. And then he automatically runs away. So who did it? This one's not too hard to figure out, is Giuseppe. And he ends up going on trial, being found guilty, and dying in an electric chair. 1910 comes around, after a few more chaotic years at the DeCilio's brothel. And we have two regulars. We have Deputy Norman Chucker, who's supposed to be keeping the order in Belfast, and is spending all his time at DeCilio's brothel, and is very familiar with Pearl Pool. And then we also have the hotel owner, Bruce Gleason, who owns that hotel that is right over here. So he's not Italian, not necessarily the most welcome, but he did like visiting the brothel a lot. So they're all hanging out, having a jolly old time, drinking a lot of alcohol. And a few shots are heard. And Norman is killed, and Bruce is severely injured and ends up dying in a hospital in Buffalo the next day. All right, well, who did it? This one is not as obvious. So the DeCilios had two daughters, and those two daughters had two sons. So the sons-in-law are Fred DiCapula and Luigi Vinciano. It is pretty well known that Luigi Vinciano doesn't really like his mother-in-law. So people automatically suspect it was Luigi. And he doesn't really help his case. He actually not only leaves Belfast, not only Allegheny County, he leaves all of New York and heads to Alabama right after the scene. Not exactly making himself look too innocent. So they decide to blame Fred DiCapula because he had a gun and was there. And Fred goes to trial and ends up being proven not guilty. So later that year in 1910, Mike and Antonetta have more charges pressed against them on multiple accounts. What they actually found guilty of is managing a disorderly house. And they are asked to leave Allegheny County. So they get out of Belfast and head back to Italy. There they fly away. But time goes on, you know, the brothel becomes a storage unit for a barn or a pig barn or whatever it becomes directly after that. And Luigi is off living his best life in Alabama, except now his name is Louis Hoepting. And he is a respectable grocer, and he has 15 children. And pretty beloved by the community and all that. At least for a little bit. 30 years later, in 1942, when he's in his 60s, he gets charged for a murder that happened in 1910. And there's a few stories about how this happened. One of them is that Fred DiCapula, his brother-in-law, was not really happy with being sent to trial all those years ago, and I guess Luigi owed him money, and he was like, well, you know what? I'm sending you to trial for those murders that happened 30 years ago. The other version, which I think is more comical, is that Luigi's wife wanted to divorce him. And she was having a hard time doing that because he's Louis, the respectable grocer. She was like, actually, his name is Luigi, and he killed 2 people in 1910. So he goes on to trial. The whole thing lasts like 30 minutes because this happened 30 years ago. Like the person who examined the dead body is dead. A lot of the people who were witnesses are dead or were highly intoxicated when it happened. So it's kind of hard to prove what happened. So he gets away, is not found guilty. And to this day, we do not know who killed Norman and Bruce. So here is the warehouse in 1967, serving as some capacity aiding a farm. They're loading some hay into the back of it. Here's the warehouse, actually a decade earlier. You can see the car parked on top of the railroad. Hopefully not for very long, but you know, that's nice to park your car. Versus what it looked like in 2023, the first time I saw it. And then if we were to jump to January this year, especially look for like the windows and look on the siding. They've done a whole bunch of work, added the doors and all that. So me and my coworkers went on a little tour of the warehouse by the current owners. This is what the inside looks like on the first floor. Pretty airy, yeah. This is some of the gaudy wallpaper hanging off the ceiling.
It's strange.
That's probably a bedroom or a suite.
That was not a bedroom, that was an office actually. This is more, got the same room, lifted up with oil. Same floor. And some photos from the 80s when it was a little more intact. Same floor. This is interesting because a lot of people have owned this building over the years. So there was air hockey tables put on the side of it for some reason. Yeah, that's a thing you can do. Second floor. So this is where the ladies of the night would have been. This is actually leading to one of their bedrooms. Different, slightly different texture of wallpaper, had a different palette on it. And then if we were to head up to the attic, the remains of the chimney. I'm looking at it. Wow. And so that is short stories along the Genesee Valley Canal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Jules. Thank you everybody for coming out tonight. Just a quick PSA of everything else coming up in September. Our next guest speaker is next Wednesday night, the 10th, Kevin Pollock from Virginia Battlefields and Notre Dame grad. We'll be talking about John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, which he wrote a book upon. We've got trivia night on September 11th, World War II in the Pacific. We have another guest speaker, Dr. Randy John. We'll be talking about the Seneca in the Revolutionary War. And on the 19th, Strummers will be here for a rock show. So if you're interested in some good music, definitely come for 2 hours worth of good music. And then, in case you haven't had enough canals, our former curator, now at Leroy Historical Society, Tyler Angora, will be talking here on Java with Joe on the 25th at 9 in the morning on the land company's influence on the Erie Canal. And that comes with free coffee and donuts, so you don't want to miss that. So, thank you everybody, and we hope to see you some other time. So, have a good night.